Hello, I am Sashimi, and today I'll be showing you how to make a piano out of furniture in Tradelands. However, I'll be making the piano on mobile, as you see, because I find it more convenient and effortless than on PC. This is an update slash continuation of the last Tradelands piano build tutorial I did last year. I find the last tutorial to be horrendous and disorganized, so today I'll be fixing that. Zupa. Now, in the screen to the right, it shows how the piano should look after you finish the tutorial, but without the decorations. The real life piano in the right side of your screen is the inspiration slash reference I took to create the piano. It's a spin it upright piano. It's not exactly the same, however, most notably the keys, because it's quite arduous to fit so many sharps slash flats in a small space, or in layman's terms, black keys. Conventional pianos have around 88 keys or 7 octaves. Sorry if I'm being too technical in describing the piano. Sehr schön. Now, let's begin with the tutorial. The following furniture needed for this tutorial. Note that the furniture slash materials don't need to be exact. It's your own choice on what seems right to you. Here's a list of all 12 furnitures you will need. End of section. Alright, let's begin with the tutorial. Make sure you have all the furniture needed to make the piano in your inventory. Use grid when you think it's useful, and turn off show outline to have more of a visual when placing the furniture. I'll take things extremely slowly for my sake and your sake. Please watch carefully. Every furniture I place doesn't need to be exactly copied, but instead you can assess whether the furniture placement is good or not yourself. Now let's begin. First furniture, the counter. The counter will be the base of the piano. Set the grid to 0.5 to make it easier. Place the counter against the wall, but leave a small space in between, as shown here. Now the pedals of the piano. The sustain, the soft, and sostenuto pedals. We're going to use the pan handles to mimic the pedals. I heavily recommend to use gold or cast iron pans. I'd also suggest using 0.5 grid to help you place the pans in the ideal position. Reminder, grid is in the bottom left corner of your screen. Place these pedals beneath the counter, but place them in the middle. Give me a moment to get the pans to the ideal spots. It's quite difficult. You need to get a good angle, so I'd recommend to move around until you find the ideal position. Well, I can't seem to get an angle, so I'll remove the counter for more angles to go from. Don't worry though, I'll place it back to its original placement afterwards. Now for the bottom front portion of the piano, the wall, or the fancy large display. I'd recommend using 0.5 grid for this part. To be honest, grid is quite helpful for making things even. Place the display facing backwards in the middle vertical pole of the counter. It should cover both the gaping hole of the counter and the pans, excluding the handles. Now we move on to the side walls of the piano, the small fancy displays. However, in this part we will be using free grid because 0.5 grid restricts certain furniture placements to specific positions. So I will be using free grid to place the fancy small displays, sidewalls, in the ideal positions. Sorry for the wall and the bright lights for blocking the view, but just note that the display should be placed as a sidewall to block the hole protruding from the counter. Now do this exact process on the other side of the piano or counter. I had issues placing it because I wanted them to be exactly symmetrical to each other. Now we move on to the long shelf that will be holding the piano keys. Use 0.5 grid for this part though. Place the long shelf adjacent and on the same level as both counter support beams, as shown here. Now we move on to more side walls of the piano, but this time it'll be boards. Watch very closely. Place this board in between and on the same level as the counter's support beams, as shown there. Now we move on to the board that will act as a sidewall of the piano keys. It's Tutmer light, but I have OCD for uneven things, especially boards like this. Perfect first try. Now place an extra board on top of each pre-existing board we placed already. Now do this exact process you did with the boards, but on the other side of the piano. Finally, we're on the keys themselves, or more specifically, the natural keys. In layman's terms, white keys. I'd heavily recommend using angel wood for the keys because conventional pianos obviously are white. As you see, I'm placing the angel wood boards horizontally from one side of the piano to the other using 0.5 grid, but you can use free grid if you want. Now I'll place the second row of angel wood boards parallel to the first row of angel wood boards, but I'll be using free grid because of the same reason, placement restrictions with 0.5 grid. Before we place the sharps and flats, or black keys, we need to place a long shelf that'll act as a floor to prevent the black keys or cast iron pans from being submerged in the angel wood boards. There will be a third row, but this time it'll be a long shelf running parallel to the row of angel wood boards. Place the long shelf about the same level as the boards. And also, make sure it's in the middle of the piano so it doesn't stick out of the piano from the sides. Can you guess what's next? The black keys. We will be using pan handles to act as the black keys of the piano. I'd heavily recommend using 0.5 grid. However, it restricts us to only 2 octaves from the actual 7 octaves. If you're studious enough, you could use free grid to place them as closely together. Each octave composes of 5 black keys and 7 white keys. No, just look it up. As you see, I'm placing 2 black keys next to each other. You also have to get a good angle though to place these pans, so I'd recommend moving around a little until you find that ideal placement. Now we leave a space in between. Then add 3 pans / black keys adjacent to each other. Why there's a space is because E sharp doesn't exist. But you could consider F as E sharp though, if we go by half steps. Every natural note, white notes, C, D, F, G, A, and B all have sharp and flat versions, in this case, primarily the black keys. Now we finished an octave. Now repeat this process by adding a space then 2 black keys, or pans. You get the idea. We can only add 2 more black keys. We're almost finished, and luckily, this is almost the exact same thing we did at the beginning, but one counter higher and pushed into the wall a bit. Or maybe half of it pushed into the wall. The long shelf that was acting as a floor for the pans is sticking out. You could remove it if you want to because it isn't essential to the aesthetic of the piano. I'd recommend not to use free grid this time because placement restrictions. So I'll place the fancy large display in the middle to the best of my abilities. Also, try to block the hole coming out of the counter and try to place it to the same level as the counter too. Next, the tilted large display. I'm going to use 0.5 grid because it's much faster to place directly in the middle than using free grid. Place it in a position where it blocks the round part of the pans, excluding the handles obviously, as seen here. This is exactly what we did previously with the small fancy displays, where we placed it to block the holes of the counter. Reminder, use free grid. We move on to even more boards. This time we will be placing these boards on the pre-existing boards on the edge of the piano. This will block the large tilted display's holes in the side. Obviously, do the exact same thing in the other side to maintain symmetry. Also, I'm placing them in a cliff-like design to prevent them from being dull and repetitive. We move on to pot hangers. These pot hangers will hold the fancy displays. Use free grid and place the pot hangers on the vertical line on the fancy large display. Then repeat this process on the other side. Now, the two fancy candle holders. Place them each on the pot hangers as you see on your screen. The support beams, or tankards. I'd heavily recommend to use 0.5 grid to make life easier because it was quite difficult to use free grid from past experiences. Place the tankard underneath the long shelf's corner, then stack another one on top of it. Repeat this process on the other corner beneath the long shelf. You could just watch and copy what I'm doing right now and the whole video entirely. Probably you had me on mute the whole time and you were just watching and copying what I was doing the whole time. Finally, last one, the fancy chair. This is self-explanatory. Since we're finished, give me a moment to decorate the piano and to put on some music. And we're back. There's the piano I made, but with some minor decorations. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if this tutorial was helpful and entertaining.